Kim Strassel writes for the Wall Street Journal editorial page, and she joins us. Kim, great to see you. So before we get into any of what we've just been talking about, there was news today from the administration that the Mueller investigation is reaching its final stage. Do you think that's true? And what does that mean exactly?
I hope so, Tucker, because 2 years of this is too long. We need some answers. It needs to happen soon. This could be the best thing that happened to the country in a very long time, if it is indeed finishing up.
Well, that's, I mean, what a distraction from a lot of important things that are happening. So as someone who covers the criminal justice world for a living, give us some perspective. Late middle-aged guy, no history of violence, no passport, no firearms in the home, under investigation for over a year, emails and texts already in the possession of the prosecutor. Would you send dozens of armed men to arrest him? Is that normal? No,
of course not. Of course not, and of course it's not normal. And as you said, the standard operating procedure here would be to call his lawyer and ask him to surrender. And I think it gets to the other point of your opening as well, too. Mr. Mueller, unfortunately, does not answer to anyone. And as a result, we can bring up these topics. You can call and ask the question, why did you do it? He doesn't have to answer it, and he doesn't have to answer to anybody in the end. And that is one of the reasons that we should hope that all of this is ending, especially when you look at the list of people he's gone after and the crimes for which they've been gone after. Nearly all of them crimes that he claims that they have committed after he was appointed as special counsel, not any for the time period he was actually asked to investigate, at least not of Americans.
So as a constitutional question, how in a democratic republic can you have someone who's accountable to no elected person, who's accountable to no voters, in other words? I thought all power in the government emanates from voters, but Mueller stands apart. How can this be constitutionally allowed?
Well, legal scholars have had a lot of problems with the special counsel law for a long time, partly on reasons that you just mentioned, and also on accountability questions as well, too. Now, look, in theory, he can be fired, okay? But what we both understand is that politically he can't be fired because of the brouhaha that would come up if anybody were to actually tell him to step down.
So why doesn't this, I mean, apart from what you think of Trump, or maybe you believe Trump is a secret agent working for Vladimir Putin, but even if you believe that, why wouldn't, and you were a liberal, why wouldn't you be very worried about a prosecutor who was operating wholly outside the system and accountable to nobody? I mean, if you really cared about democracy, that would terrify you, wouldn't it?
Well, we've seen the left change their view on all kinds of things, Tucker. Remember, this is a party that at one point cared about abusive law enforcement tactics. They cared about the things you just mentioned, accountability, making sure that there was accountability in democracy and that someone had to answer to someone else. But when it comes to Donald Trump, they're quite happy to throw all of that on the other side. And it's been very frustrating to people like me who've been trying to write about Mr. Mueller's probe in an objective way and look at the evidence out there in an objective way and say, look, would anybody like to see what happened to Carter Page happen to anybody else on the basis of the opposition research that they used? The Democrats should be very worried that a future Justice Department might do this to one of their candidates, and no one should want that.
I will defend that candidate if it ever happens. I mean it. I think this is totally wrong. Kim Strassel, thank you very much for that perspective. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
In the 20 years that I've been covering our border issues, there was always at least one point of agreement on both sides of the issue: that new immigrants should work hard to speak English because doing so would help ensure their success here and also speed up assimilation.
Illegal immigrants who have roots in our country and want to stay should have to pay a meaningful penalty for breaking the law, to pay their taxes, to learn English.
I think learning English is not just important for assimilation, it's important for economic success.
If you've been here a certain amount of time, you've got a clean record, you're willing to pay a fine, learn English.
They have to pay taxes, they have to learn English.
To become American citizens, to be part of the economy, part of the system, learn English, do all the things that we think is an important part of being an American.
I want to clap when I hear that. Well, in today's Democrat Party, things are moving so far and so far left and so fast that the entire speak English sentiment has become radioactive. Enter liberal lion Tom Brokaw. He was appearing on Meet the Press yesterday, and a breath after he was frankly stereotyping border enforcement advocates, he had the nerve to say this.
I also happen to believe that the Hispanics should work harder at assimilation. That's one of the things I've been saying for a long time. You know, that they ought not to be just codified in their communities, but make sure that all their kids are learning to speak English and that they feel comfortable in the communities. And that's going to take outreach on both sides, frankly.
How dare he say that? Speak English in their fierce outrage poured in almost instantaneously, especially from the 2020 herd seeking an edge in the radical beauty pageant. Congressman Joaquin Castro tweeting to Brokaw, Tom Brokaw, for a celebrated NBC News journalist who spent years chronicling American society, you seem stunningly ignorant of the Hispanic community in this country. Unfortunate to see xenophobia pass for elevated political commentary. And that's not all, folks. It got worse, both on and offline for Brokaw, despite his numerous and, frankly, embarrassing Twitter apologies.
The idea that we think of American can only speak English as if Spanish and other languages wasn't always part of America is in some ways troubling.
There is absolutely nothing wrong with speaking Spanish. It's an antiquated view of our country to think otherwise.
He's a little out of touch. What he's saying is just absolutely not true. Latinos absolutely assimilate.
Well, this is how bad it's gotten in the Democrat Party, though. And of course, many Latinos have assimilated. But the main point here is English has become controversial. Assimilation in some quarters has become controversial. So to be an authentic, credible Democrat today, you have to believe that the party's views of just a few years ago are now basically racist, xenophobic, and hateful. This is insane. Now, something similar unfolded at Duke University over the weekend as well. The politically correct fanatics in academia put another trophy on the wall when assistant professor Megan Neely, who headed up the university's biostatistics master's program, was forced to step down from her post this weekend. Her crime in an email, well, she sent to grad students last Friday. And in it, she said 2 faculty members had come up to her to complain about students loudly speaking Chinese in a common area. So she wrote that both were disappointed that the students weren't working to improve their English. Neely's big sin was urging them to, quote, commit to speaking English 100% of the time while on campus. Perish the thought. Again, it wasn't a slam on Chinese. It was kind of a ham-fisted way of encouraging folks to speak our language while in our country, studying, by the way, at one of our premier universities. Now, it was ultimately to help the students compete for projects and employment. Why is that a bad thing? The horror. Again, the accused profusely apologized for her language offense, but it didn't matter. The damage was already done. Now, look, as I've said many times, you know, I speak Russian, I speak English, speak English usually the time, speak Spanish. It's terrific for kids to speak multiple languages. Being bilingual, trilingual, that gives kids a huge leg up in this economy and a lot of options. But at the same time, English is our national language. And folks who want to come here legally should learn to speak it. There's nothing racist about saying that at all, unless Obama, George W., and pretty much every American president is also racist. And if an American who's shopping in a store gets, I don't know, impatient when a cashier can't speak English, that doesn't necessarily make the patron a xenophobe or a bad person. They're frustrated. And you know what I was thinking today? What would Teddy Roosevelt think today? Remember what he said so eloquently in a letter read shortly before his death that he had written in 1919? He said, in the first place, we should insist that if the immigrant who comes here in good faith becomes an American and assimilates himself to us, he shall be treated on exact equality with everyone else. There can be no divided allegiance here. We have room for but one language here, and that is the English language. For we intend to see that crucible turns our people out as Americans, of American nationality, and not as dwellers in a polyglot boarding house. I want to become just a polyglot boarding house. It's not just, though, that the English language requirement can set off today's Democrat conformity police. Not just that. Even a two-term vice president isn't immune. Joe Biden was wrapped last week for daring to say a nice thing about a Republican.
I get in trouble. I read in the New York Times today that that one of my problems is if I ever run for president, I like Republicans. Okay, well, bless me, Father, if I have sinned. But you know, from where I come from, I don't know how you get anything done. I don't know how you get anything done until we start talking to one another again.
So, common sense from Biden. Sometimes you have to reach across the aisle. He got slammed for that in left-wing quarters. I love going online to see what they're all saying. Nutso. Now, continuing, even a famous comedian is forced to play by the shifting rules of the left today. Remember when it was announced that Kevin Hart was going to be the host of the Academy Awards? Well, the Mercy crowd dug up 10-year-old tweets and charged Hart with being homophobic. So even after he apologized and Ellen came out to support him, the left would not be satisfied.
With all this being said and all this controversy and all the way ways you've addressed it, is there a hope that you would host the Oscars this year?
No.
So that's an absolute no.
Yes, I'm not hosting the Oscars this year.
Well, the litmus test now for headlining the gig is now so difficult to pass that the Oscars will be hostless this year. Chalk another one up for the sensitivity squad. Nice going, guys. All this demonstrates that Democrats in politics, the media, and academia are zealous about enforcing borders after all. Their own. They aggressively police their own ever-morphing code of progressive ethics. And if you run afoul of them, their mercenaries will destroy you. In some cases, even profuse, abject, yes, embarrassing apologies will not suffice. So today you may be part of the cool crowd, but tomorrow you're all disposable and walking on eggshells to boot. Good luck with that in 2020. And that's The Angle.